Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our theme is pawn breakthroughs. It's a very important topic in chess strategy. And I chose two very instructive games of one of my all-time favorites, José Raúl Capablanca. Here is how the game started as a Ruy Lopez. His opponent was Blackburn, and Blackburn chose the Blackburn variation, which is invented by him. Knight d4 is an interesting move. It provokes the immediate trade between the two knights. Knight d4, ed4. Of course, the drawback of it is that black has doubled up his pawns on the d file. White castled, and black played g6 to fianchetto the bishop. d3, bishop g7, white develops, so does black. And white played f4. A good-looking move gaining space. c6, bishop c4, and black played d5. I'm not going to spend too much time on the opening phase of the game, but want to get to the more interesting and more instructive from our perspective middle game part. Game bishop to b3 and castle. Knight f3. White is getting ready for a kingside attack. And black is looking for counterplay by playing c5. Now black is planning to play c4 in hopes that if then white captures, then black would capture on e4, although it's only a trade of pawns, would give black an amazing advantage in the middle of the board. White responded by e5, making sure that's not going to happen. Now white has a clear pawn majority on the king side of the board. It's true that black has the same on the other side, but black has the problem that two of those pawns are doubled. Black responded very logically by playing b5, looking for counterplay, and in fact about to trap white's bishop by c4. White needs to do something about it, and real quick, before the bishop gets trapped, and therefore played c3. It's true that now black has the opportunity to trade the pawn on c3, and with that get rid of the double pawns, which they did very soon, but first played c4, bishop c2, and now traded on c3. So here we are at the key part of the game, where both sides are trying to gain space and march their pawns on the opposite sides of the board. And this was the first key moment where black had to make a choice whether to trade the pawns on d3 or allow white to advance that pawn and get it out of the exchange. The correct choice would have been to trade the pawns and then try to target white's c pawn on the open file. Black instead played queen a5, attacking the pawn on c3, which is still not that bad, although the queen would be needed for defense on the other side of the board. And white protected the pawn with bishop d2. And this was the last moment that black could still trade those pawns on d3, and that would have been the correct choice. Instead, black made yet another inaccuracy by developing the bishop and creating a pin. And now a very important key strategical decision that white made very correctly, namely to lock up the center and strengthen the e5 pawn, and to have a free hand on the king side. But you may say, what about black on the other side of the board? Can't black just prepare b4 and do just as well? Well, we will see that very, very soon, but things are not quite the same. Typically, it's very powerful if you can push your pawn to your furthest advanced pawn. So in this case, white's furthest advanced pawn is on e5, and therefore white's goal should be to try to advance the f pawn, which is the closest to the furthest advanced pawn. And black played queen b6, realizing that the queen is misplaced on a5, perhaps preparing a5 and b4. But white, famously for Capablanca, prevents all shadow of counterplay of the opponent. Black now, actually, even without playing a5, was already threatening to play b4. For example, after h3, black could have traded and then immediately play b4 in view that if now pawn takes, the queen could capture on d4. Let's go back to the game. After queen b6, white simply made a preventive move with rook b1. And now black's plan is pretty much stopped. The big difference is that while white has the bishop on d2, actively preventing black's advancement on the b file, the black bishop is very far from being able to aid that same plan. Black played a6, which is kind of resigning to the idea of playing a5 and b4. As Emanuel Lasker would describe it, the white pawns are working while the black ones do not. Capablanca continued with h3, attacking black's bishop, and here black had to make another important strategic choice. Should black trade the bishop for the knight or play bishop f5, which, to be honest, is quite natural looking, to get control of the light squares? Black's problem is that they will not be able to maintain this blockade on f5, and therefore it was a better choice to actually trade the bishop for the knight and then follow that up with playing f5. As we know, in closed type of positions, which this is, knights are more valuable than bishops, and following that principle, this was clearly black's best choice. But let's follow up how the game continued after bishop f5. This is a very interesting moment where white made a move that's first may be surprising to many. Namely, he played g4. Of course, oftentimes in many books they say do not weaken your king's position, meaning do not move your g or h pawns in front of your castled king. And generally, that's certainly a true statement. However, there are numerous exceptions to that, and especially in situations when the center is firmly closed, you can afford to still do it. And in this case, the white king is nowhere near any danger from the black army. In fact, it is the black king that needs to worry about the white pawns rolling down. Black traded bishops, and now white is very strongly threatening to advance the pawn. And therefore black played himself f5, preventing that. Now we reach the new phase of the game where white needs to create a plan. How to make progress. It seems that black is doing okay. The e-pawn cannot advance, the queen stops its way for now. The f5 pawn is sufficiently protected. And black still has the potential, perhaps one day, to play a5 and b4. Well, let's look for a plan from white's perspective. What to do? Typically for such situations, the correct plan for white is to move the king out of the way to h2 and then put one or both rooks on the g file. After that, the next stage of the plan would be put the knight on h4 targeting f5 And the final step would be to relocate the bishop from d2 to c1 and then a3 to getting rid of black's defending piece on e7. So that is the game plan. Alternatively, if black along the way at some point would try to trade on g4, the pawns white would recapture with the pawn, and then the f4, f5 push idea would be revived. So let's see in practice how the game continued. Capablanca started out indeed with king h2, clearing the g1 square for the rook. And here black lost patience and decided to move his knight away immediately on his own to c6 with the idea to relocate the knight to e6, which looks like a very nice blockading square, but it's a bit too slow in this case. White continued with the plan, rook g1, and black played rook d8. Now that the knight left voluntarily from e7, white has no need for a bishop maneuver, as the whole purpose of that would have been to chase the knight away from e7. White is ready for action. Pawn takes. If the g-pawn takes back, white can double up the rooks, and black is in a very difficult situation. Rook took, and immediately knight h4. If now black's rook retreats, white would make one more preparatory move with rook b2 f1, followed by f5 with a very clear attack against black's king. Black made an even worse move, an awkward move a bit, moving to h5, hoping to chase the knight back. To black's disappointment, the knight didn't go back, but immediately sacrificed itself to destroy the defensive pawn structure in front of black's king. Pawn takes, and rook takes. If now the black queen moves to b7, white would follow it up with rook b2 g1, rook h7, and f5, followed by f6 with an easily winning attack. Going back to the game ended with black playing queen b8, perhaps hoping to put pressure on the e5 pawn, maybe in some situation to move the king out of the pin, and after an f5 to sacrifice the bishop on e5. But black never got to that because another sacrifice arrived with rook g7, and the rook comes in to the game, followed by queen g6 attacking the rook, and black will get checkmated real soon. The game ended after black gave up the rook for the pawn, and the black king is too naked to get defense. This game was an amazing example on how powerful the pawn chains can be when they start rolling down. And now let's see another example, again from José Raúl Capablanca. Here we go. This is the next example, and here his opponent was Dus Hutimirsky, and this is played in 1913. Well, let's look at this position. There is a material balance, there are opposite colored bishops, and black has doubled the pawns. However, the black pieces seem to be pretty well positioned with the knight on c5. The black bishop can move to f6 at some point, and the d4 pawn may even become a strength at one point if it gets to advance. However, white used the moment to gain initiative using some tactics. As the famous say goes by Richard Rati, tactics are the foundation of positional play. And white continued here playing b4, chasing the knight away. If black right now would trade the knight for the bishop, then white would get a clear advantage, primarily because of the weakness of the c6 square and the b5 pawn. Between the white rook threatening to come to a5, and also the white knight threatening to come to b3, on one hand attacking the pawn on d4, and also then trying to go to c6 to a beautiful outpost. Looks like a real unpleasant situation for black. Going back to the position where white played b4, the actual game continued with knight a4. And now white has a very cute tactical opportunity that results in strategical gain. And I suggest you take a few minutes trying to figure this idea out. White traded rooks, which at first looks like a mistake, giving up the control of the c file. However, it's based on a simple tactic. Right now, if white would go and attack the pawn on b5 a second time, it would only invite the black knight to come to c3, where it was heading anyway, and it not only protects the pawn on b5, but immediately would counterattack the queen. So what should white do right now? As I'm mentioning so often in these lessons, always pay attention to which pieces are unprotected. And in this case, black actually has two of them, the rook and the bishop. And that is what is costing him. White is able to advance the e-pawn, thanks to the tactic that if pawn takes, then queen f5 arrives, not only attacking the rook, but also the h7 pawn, which results in a two-move checkmate if the black rook would leave right now. What is also amazing about this situation after e5, that all of a sudden, just in one move, there has been a transformation between the dynamic between the white pieces and the black pieces. While a move ago we could have thought that black's knight is very well positioned on a4, it's a beautiful outpost, it's about to come to c3, everything is great, all of a sudden we realize that the action shifted from the queen side to the middle of the board and the king side. So now all of a sudden, the fact that the white knight is back here on f1 and far away from the queen side doesn't matter anymore. In fact, the knight is ready to jump in and be in the action very, very quickly. The same goes about white's bishop on d3. The bishop on d3 a minute ago seemed that it's being locked up behind the pawn on e4. The same goes with white's rook. The rook on a1 seemed to be cut out of play by black's knight on a4, while the black rook beautifully occupying the open c file. And even the queens. The queen, as long as the action was on the queen side, the white one seemed to be out of place, while the black one seemed well positioned. Now all of a sudden, we realize that 3 of the 4 black pieces are on the wrong side of the board. Of course, black did not fall into the obvious trap of capturing the pawn and allowing queen f5, but responded by playing g6, preventing queen f5. The problem now is that the white pawn is able to advance even further by playing e6. Black is in serious trouble now. Black responded with rook f8, protecting the pawn on f7. And now it's time to bring another piece to the attack with knight g3. This seems like a mistake because it allows pawn takes pawn discovery. However, black will not be able to hang on to the extra pawn because, for example, after e5, white immediately would destroy all defense in front of black's king, and the knight is right there ready to help, threatening to checkmate on g7, and after the natural rook g8, checkmate, game over. Let's go back to the game. Therefore, black did not bother capturing on e6, but played queen b7. And now, while white can play in various ways, the most effective one is to play knight f5, a very brilliant move, sacrificing the knight immediately, attacking all kind of important squares on the king side. If takes, simply queen takes back, threatening to checkmate, and the king cannot run too far. After king f6, takes f7. Now the g6 square is available for our queen. Check, and of course the black king is getting checkmated on the following move. After knight f5, black immediately captured on e6. Looks like a smart idea to do. But surprise again, pawn can simply recapture, as if now queen takes queen, intermediate check wins a piece. Very nice. Always look out for intermediate moves. Black played queen c7, hoping that white now must take knight takes bishop and then still be in the game. But white has another amazing move. I'm sure it will give you tremendous pleasure finding that move on your own, so I suggest you take a minute to do so. And that impressive move is queen c6. Brilliant! If queen takes queen, white not only wins the queen back, but ends up winning a bishop along the way. Queen retreated to d8, knight took the bishop, and bishop b5. Well, after everything cleared out, now white is up a pawn and has an easily winning position. Here is how the game concluded. Queen d7, queens got traded, rook b8 and e7, followed by rook e1, forcing the black rook in front of the pawn. And now white still has to make some precise moves, making sure black's d-pawn doesn't advance too fast. Rook e6, a very good move. As now the pawn on d6 is hanging, the king needs to stay on e8 under white's passed pawn. Pawn advanced to d5, and now the white king arrives right on time in case black advances the pawn to d3. And here black basically gave up, retreating the knight. And now the other pawn is running too. And basically it's game over, even though black made a few more moves, but it had no importance to the game. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. This endgame is composed by another favorite composer of mine, Troitsky. Black seems to be in a completely winning position, having an extra queen, while white only has an extra knight and 3 pawns. In addition, white's pawn on e6, the most advanced one of them all, is pinned. I suggest have fun and try to figure out the solution. Amazingly, white's knight d5 move not only threatens to checkmate in 1 by playing b4 on the next move, but it wins the game, regardless on how black continues. If black takes the knight, white will respond by the discovery check, b4, forcing the king onto the same diagonal with the queen, and then after the bishop check, king takes, bishop takes, and white's queenside pawns simply run away, and white wins. It wouldn't save black either if after knight e5 they would try to be tricky and give their queen up, followed by bishop g8, and take the knight on d5, because white immediately will play b4 and then win the bishop. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you learned a bit more about pawn breakthroughs and in general about chess strategy. Thank you for listening, and so long until next week.